Hello and salutations to you all once again. Welcome back to the Philos-Hippie, where we explore the intersection of spirituality and philosophy and how we can begin to lead more holistic and meaningful secular lives. Now, to begin today's episode, I want you to imagine that you're at your favorite concert, surrounded by hundreds of other fans passionately singing along to your favorite band and your favorite song. When all of a sudden the lights go out, everyone has their flashlights or lighters out, and everyone's harmonizing in one glorious moment. Or rather, you're standing on top of a mountain late at night and you feel that you're so close to the stars that you can reach out and touch them, and you're just struck by awe. Perhaps you felt the Holy Spirit enter into you during worship at church and you understood the truth of God in a new and empowering light. Or maybe you were just on the subway and someone offered you a seat and you were filled with immense gratitude. All of these moments can induce in a person a wave of goosebumps and awe or chills that runs through their entire body. We often feel these waves of energy when we feel deeply connected to ourselves and the world around us. But why exactly do we feel these sensations? Does everyone experience them? What is their evolutionary purpose, if any at all? And why do they fill us with such a sense of peace and purpose? And are we able to orchestrate our lives around infusing our realities with these precious moments to maximize our happiness and eudaimonia? These are all worthy questions to ponder on as they help us to better relate to reality and perhaps feel a deeper connection with it. Now, before we dive into this topic fully, it is crucial to understand a few precedent facts. These goosebumps or chills that we experience actually have a technical term for it. It's called frisson. It is the French word for shiver, and it's a psychophysiological response to rewarding or dangerous stimuli. Some people even call it aesthetic chills, psychogenic shivers, and even the evocative yet encapsulating phrase skin orgasms. Now, not everyone can experience frisson or frisson, although a good majority of people can. However, there are also others who self reportedly claim that they can initiate it on command just by thinking about it. The evolutionary purpose is linked to several factors at play. In animals, when cats spike their hairs up, they are provoking their fight or flight response. The same goes with porcupines as well when they feel they are in distress. Or animals with fur can have their hands stand up in order to warm themselves in the cold. This is something that humans experience too, and it's probably the most common time humans experience frisson. When our hairs stand up in this manner, the process is called piloerection, and is experienced due to muscle contractions at the base of our hair follicles. The experience of frisson is initiated by the amygdala in the brain, which releases adrenaline into our nervous system. The amygdala is the part of the brain that helps to regulate our emotions and help us to process them. Emotions such as fear, aggression, motivation, and also the rewards and desires. It also plays a critical role in shaping our emotional memories and experiences. This will be key to understanding later on as we dive deeper. Maybe cavemen's sympathetic nervous system back in the day felt the hairs on their arms stand up when they were hunting alone in the dark and felt some predatory creature stalking them, and they felt that they were in danger, almost like a sixth sense or something. However, it doesn't just release adrenaline when we face fear, but it can also give us profound feelings of pleasure because frisson releases endogenous opioids into our nervous system when at play. You're quite literally getting high on your own supply when you experience something aesthetically beautiful or mortifyingly dangerous. Now, it's a pretty good thing we aren't cavemen anymore and don't have to worry about fears that a tiger will eat us for their second dinner that night. In the modern world, we typically experience frisson while listening to music, and this is one of the areas that we can most easily recognize the effects of frisson. And there are some theories as to why that is the case. The musicologist David Huron has endorsed the contrast valence theory, which, to quote him, suggests that our emotional states are strongly influenced by contrast. End quote. So, for example, whenever we listen to a sad song, it may make us feel low, but then when a triumphant and hopeful bridge suddenly comes in and build up to the climax of the song, it makes us feel much happier than we would have been if we were already in a previous happy state. This involves a neurophysiological process called cognitive reappraisal, in which our minds reframe the meaning of a stimulus, according to the Dr. Anna Nordvig. When we are able to transform a sad situation into a positive one, the effect is much more profound on us and more likely to shape core emotional memories in our life. The same works in reverse when we were feeling really happy and then feel really sad all of a sudden. However, many scientists think this evolutionary trait we possess has no real utility in our modern world and is simply a leftover from our primitive genes. Because of this, there is not much conclusive evidence as to how we experience frisson in regards to music, aesthetically meaningful experiences, or straight up fear. Science has done a really good job explaining the causal mechanisms of why we experience frisson and goosebumps and these shivers, despite its subjective nature without quantitative ways of measuring it. Although, due to limited funding and research in this area, it has not done an adequate job, in my perspective, as to how we actually experience frisson and its deeper qualities. This is exactly where the study of phenomenology comes into play, and will hopefully allow us to gain a deeper understanding of this experience, where science has left the trail. And perhaps, phenomenology can lead us to a more holistic and meaningful way of living. Where science gives us external models, phenomenology gives us internal understanding. Now, to sum up in a vast generalization, phenomenology is the philosophical study of our embodied and lived experience. Pioneered by Edmund Husserl in the late 19th to early 20th century, he desired to understand the fundamental experience of experience itself. He called it ultimately a science of experience, in his words, an objective study of the subjective. Husserl recognized that we can only observe reality through our first person perspective, and that any attempt to utilize the scientific method from an unattached observer perspective was ultimately fruitless, unless it accounted for the observer's experience of said observation. We cannot aim for truth if we do not account for the context in which we seek truth. And that context, at its most basic core, is our conscious awareness. Phenomenology attempts to explore the intersection between the structures of consciousness and its content. It helps to explain what it's qualitatively like to experience a certain feeling, thought, emotion, physical experience, and much more. Husserl's famous critique of modern Western philosophy, which has detached itself from the subjective through the objectification of reality in his eyes, was that we need to, quote, return to the things themselves, end quote, to fully understand the essences that comprise reality. Husserl was a bit of a closet Platonist, and he thought that an essence was the ideal structure of a thing or experience. Not too dissimilar from Plato's theory of the forms, where there exists perfect, unchanging, eternal versions of abstract objects that we can only access through our minds. Husserl's biggest development, however, in regards to Platonic idealism in this regard is that he doesn't restrict essences to non physical reality like Plato, which was accessible only by reason to him. But Husserl broke with the tradition and tried to gain a greater understanding of these essences through our conscious lived experience and way of being. Our first person experience of reality is crucial if we are ever to actually understand it from an objective point of view. Later in the middle 20th century, the French philosopher Merleau-Ponty advanced the development of phenomenology through his concept of embodied consciousness. He wrote in his landmark book, Phenomenology of Perception, that, to quote, the body is our general medium for having a world, end quote. We cannot find consciousness inside the body, but rather it is bodily. Our thoughts, feelings, emotions, actions are all different ways in which our consciousness manifests itself in our lives. So, whenever we experience goosebumps, chills, or frisson, it is not simply an outdated revolutionary response mechanism, but rather it is the way in which our body is actively participating in the meaningfulness of whatever experience provoked it. I cannot not feel chills and waves of energy reverberate across my body when I realize a deep truth or gaze into the endless starry night sky and am filled with awe. It simply happens without my control. This all implies and gives evidence that our body and mind are not disconnected as has been the case throughout most of modern Western history, but rather they're intimately connected with our consciousness. So what? How does this study of phenomenology apply to the experience of goosebumps, or what's also known in the academic community as frisson, aesthetic chills, or psychogenic shivers, or even the erotic phrase skin orgasms? It matters because frisson is a feeling most of us experience in life without many explanatory and satisfactory reasons as to why and how it qualitatively feels within the scientific community. Phenomenology allows us to dive deeper into the fundamental essence of this weirdly human feature many of us possess. Phenomenology helps to shift the question from what causes frisson to what is frisson or goosebumps like. Now, frisson can be an immensely pleasurable experience, and something one feels whenever they encounter something profoundly meaningful in their life, or just aesthetically amazing. Like I said in the intro, it often occurs when we feel a deep connection between our internal lives and the external world, when the microcosm becomes fully integrated within the macrocosm. It happens when we listen to a powerful piece of music. Maybe it was your favorite song from the past and you hadn't listened to it for years, and the chords and melodies suddenly bring back powerful emotions inside of you. It can happen when reflecting back on your life and feeling immense gratitude for the path you may have taken. The experience of frisson allows us to feel a deeper unity with our inner spirit and with the wider world in which we inhabit. One of the most common features in regards to frisson is the psychological phenomenon of awe. And unlike frisson, there is much more scientific and psychological data available in this regard. In many ways, in my eyes, frisson is simply the biological marker for awe. And awe is the holy grail of this episode of the podcast quest to live a more wondrous and meaningful life. Now, awe has a broad range of meanings. It was often used in ancient religious contexts, especially Old Norse, to indicate fear and reverence for their gods. We also see this prevalent in Abrahamic religions. But in fact, the word awe, as we use it today, was initially derived from the Old Norse word agi. And later on, during the Romanticist period of the post Enlightenment, people later adapted the use of awe to describe feats of nature in similar ways instead of deities. For example, one would feel awe while witnessing a massive tsunami wiping out an entire village, or seeing a volcano explode, or also just stargazing at night. But witnessing it would fill us with such dread and fear or amazement, but also a simultaneous feeling of reverence, wondering, and respect for the powers of nature at be. In modern times, however, awe is linked to words like awful and awesome. It makes sense that awe has both a positive and negative connotation, since the amygdala processes emotions like these, positive and negative, whenever adrenaline is released into our nervous systems, and can induce either excitement or fear into us. Now, in a wonderful research paper published by UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, Summer Allen, PhD, has gathered the most up to date research when it comes to the phenomenon in awe, and I will be referencing it quite a bit now for the next few minutes. In this paper, Allen highlights how many studies have come to light showing how awe is intimately linked to a number of positive outcomes. For instance, those who experience awe are more likely to experience reduced inflammation, improved mental health, enhanced social behavior, a deeper sense of connectedness, greater life satisfaction, and easier facilitation of scientific reasoning, which I personally found really fascinating. But it also includes a decreased sense of materialism, lasting lifelong transformations, and last but not least, spiritual feelings aligned with what the psychologist Kirk Schneider has called awe based consciousness and also enchanted agnosticism. Because in its essence, I love this phrase, enchanted agnosticism, because in its essence, that is what this entire podcast aims to do, bringing enchantment and meaning back to a materialist, disenchanted worldview that Max Weber diagnoses our modern age with. This whole topic of enchantment and disenchantment is an episode of the podcast for another day. However, Allen also references the psychologists Dacher Keltner and Jonathan Haidt, who presented a conceptual approach to awe in 2003, and the two of them outline two central features awe has in common. One, perceived vastness, and two, a need for accommodation. Vastness, in this sense, It's when we experience something grand, an utterly humbling experience where our sense of self shrinks. It's when we gaze into the Grand Canyon and stand in amazement as we realize its deep history entirely predates the span of the human race. Keltner and Haidt also say that it doesn't necessarily have to be physical size that can induce awe in us, but also social size, such as status, fame, heroism, or maybe something amazingly and humanly complex like a Picasso painting or the Beatles' White Album, for example. We can feel awe when we admire the works of outstanding individuals because it helps to shine a light back towards us at humanity's potential, which inevitably inspires us to build upon that everlasting legacy. The concept of awe involving a need for accommodation, however, entails that our current understanding of the world is inadequate and that we need to expand our worldview in order to accommodate it. Now, to further illustrate, I will provide a personal example. Earlier this year, I got the opportunity to drink ayahuasca in the Sacred Valley, Peru, and this experience gave me incredible philosophical insights, which I will fully elaborate on the next episode of the podcast, or maybe another time. But this experience forced me to reevaluate how I think of myself in the world. In short, it gave me a sense of complete certainty that consciousness pervades everything, and fully persuaded me to the idea of panpsychism. I don't want to dive into what all that means today because that is a whole other podcast in and of itself, but needless to say, it forced me to reconsider my dualistic perception of reality, where I thought my body and my soul were separate from each other, and instead allowed me to recognize that mind, nous, soul, consciousness, any of those fancy pretentious words, was absolutely fundamental to reality, and possibly even more real than our material realm. In Allen's paper, he also highlights how recent studies indicate that awe can also be a fundamentally self transcendent experience, where we lose our sense of self and become absorbed into something greater than ourselves. That is what I and many others have experienced while on psychedelics or mystical experiences. But it doesn't have to be induced by plant medicine or divine unity like that. It can also be experienced in mindfulness meditation, but also flow states, as we heavily discussed in the last episode of the podcast. In this way, awe could be considered an altered state of consciousness, one induced by the drug of being high off of life itself. Now, for a little while, I'm not going to look into scientific studies and I'm going to dive purely into my own philosophical speculation. So at this point, feel free to put your skeptical goggles on as I dive into some personal connections I made between frisson and the concept of what is known as the daemon. My own studies and personal experience have led me to believe, or at least more likely to believe, that these goosebumps we feel in awe of something grander than ourselves, or when we receive a profound insight from the depths of our subconscious, elucidates spiritual guidance at work in our lives. Maybe goosebumps, or whenever we get the chills, is indicative of some higher spiritual force at play that is acting out in our lives. Now, I'm about to get it personal with you for a little bit and share with you a story that steered the entire course of my life that relates to this concept of the daimon. I was 12 years old on vacation with my family to the beaches of Florida, off the coast of San Augustine. And it was pretty late at night, about dusk time, and my family went off to walk along the shoreline hunting for jellyfish. Now, I decided to be an angsty teenager and stay behind and watch the waves inch higher up with the rise of the tide as the stars began to slowly pop out of nothingness. To keep it relatively short and not go into too much detail into my personal life, I was going through an immensely dark time during that period of my life. For instance, all my friends had recently ditched and abandoned me. I just had a devastating breakup and experienced heartache for the first time, as much as you can for just being 12 years old. And I had also had issues with my mom. I wasn't able to see her anymore due to her own problems. And I also lived in adamant rejection of the new people being introduced into my family. I had already had moments of suicidal ideation during that trip, but to add the cherry on top, that was the exact same week that Robin Williams committed suicide. And I remember that having a very profound effect on me at the time because I was seeing someone that was always being praised for bringing a smile to everyone's face, but he had suffered his own dark demons and actually lost the battle. If he couldn't enjoy this life with so much positivity and joy and laughter, then how could I possibly do the same? That night, I seriously contemplated running away from my family, completely ignoring the potential consequences of this with no plan at all. I was just gonna run and run until I found a better family or a better path. I just knew I would get away and run. As I was thinking all this through, I genuinely thought that the voice of God suddenly called out to me. Except I didn't hear his voice, but it was instead more of a whisper that tugged at my heartstrings inside. The Bible verse Jeremiah 29:11 ran through my mind, in which it says, quote, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." End quote. These shivers shook me down to my core and penetrated into the very fibers of my being. As I was pondering this, I was filled with the utmost faith and confidence for the first time in my life. My path ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, but I was certain that I wasn't walking the path alone. Nowadays, however, after my deconstruction, I don't think it was Yahweh that called out to me that night, but rather demonic influences or spirit guide or guardian protector influences at play or whatever term you want to use. Now, the concept of a daimon originated within the ancient Greeks, most notably in the enigmatic figure of Socrates. Socrates was widely known to be influenced by demonic forces, not demon, daimon, which impelled him to live virtuously in his pursuit of the truth. And it also steered him from activities that would have been harmful to him. The word daimon with an A is originally a Greek term that later got adapted by medieval Christians to refer to demons without the A, as we typically know them today. For Christians, demon is both an entity and a quality, as in the phrase rock music is demonic, for example. However, Plato never used a phrase like that when referring to Socrates, and never had daemon to refer to some intermediary spiritual entity, but rather used it to describe the quality of the experience Socrates had. It would be better to say that Socrates didn't have a daemon or guardian angel or spirit protector as we commonly think of it, but rather Socrates had demonic experiences that connected him with the divine and guided his inner consciousness. Plato never wrote that Socrates had a daemon, but rather was compelled by demonic influences. Daniel Rexon, with a bachelor's in classics and an MA in psychology, has written an interesting article saying that, quote, just as English can represent entities, demons, and qualities demonic through related words, so too does the ancient Greek represent both entities and qualities. Plato used the demonic quality describes signs, voices, or something in relationship with Socrates, but he never used the word daemon explicitly to represent a spiritual entity. End quote. The most notable instance of Socrates invoking his demonic influences was during the Apology, when he testified to the court that he did absolutely nothing wrong when accused of impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens, because he was abiding by his inner voice or conscience, which always guided him in the right direction and led him to teach philosophy to Athens, is what compelled him to do so. Socrates believed in the gods more than he did the ideas of men. To quote Socrates after being accused of not believing in the gods, he says, quote, "The cause of this is that which you have often heard me everywhere asserting, because a certain divine and demoniacal voice is present within me, which also Meletus and his accusation derided. This voice attended me from a child, and when it is present, always dissuades me from what I intended to do, but never incites me." Elsewhere, Socrates says his daemon prevented him from entering politics because if he did, he would have been viciously persecuted by the elites of the day due to Socrates' radically honest and virtuous nature, which would have made the others look bad. In the Phaedrus, Socrates is also quoted by Plato as saying, quote, "When I was about to pass over the river, excellent man, a demoniacal and usual signal was given me. And whenever this takes place, it always prohibits me from accomplishing what I was about to do. And in the present instance, I seem to hear a certain voice, which would not suffer me to depart till I had made an expiation, as if I had offended in some particular a divine nature. This voice that calls out to you in a manner of divine destiny and impels you to act differently is what I experienced on the beach that night. And I am sure that those of you listening have probably likewise experienced something similar in your spiritual lives. And when we experience this, it makes our spirits shiver. But I argue also physically. Now, I am of the belief that these shivers and goosebumps or frisson are a sign someone is following their soulful destiny. Or if you don't believe in that, someone is authentically living aligned to one's personal values, dreams, and aspirations. When one feels frisson, I argue that one's demonic influences are at play, and that some higher power or divine consciousness is trying to give us a sign that we are headed in the right direction. When I was a Christian, my most powerful moments of prayer were always followed by waves of goosebump and frisson, and when I later deconstructed it, I experienced the same thing when realizing deep truths in philosophical text or receiving insights from meditation. Now, in regards to meditation, I would like to focus on this aspect for a moment and show how these shivers and goosebumps are actually a crucial step in the process of trying to reach inner peace and nirvana through meditation. Earlier this year, I got the opportunity to attend a 10-day silent Vipassana retreat. And in that retreat, I learned the meditation techniques Siddhartha Gautama discovered on his quest for enlightenment in the 5th century BCE. One had to develop and focus their attention and do body scans of any sensation they came across and whatever arose, whether it be mental, emotional, or physical. These sensations could be of a gross, heavily physical nature, or rather subtle vibrations. The teacher S. N. Goenka often used the term subtle vibrations in his lessons to refer to when you felt peace from your monkey mind and you were able to fully rest in tranquility with no perturbance from thoughts. Whenever I experience these subtle vibrations, they are very reminiscent of the phenomenological experience of frisson. Parts of my body would shiver with chills, and at other times, a profound realization, my entire body was covered in goosebumps. As I continued in the retreat, I was eventually able to call upon these subtle vibrations or sensations to command just by thinking about it. Not as of late, because I haven't been as great at my meditation practice, but anyways. This has been immensely powering in my personal life when it does arise because these shivers and chills always induce in me a profound feeling of peace, self assurance, and confidence that whatever I'm doing in my spiritual life is leading me in the right direction. Like I said earlier, I have no scientific data to back any of this up, just my own personal experience and the accounts of others like Socrates and my Vipassana teachers. But if a majority of people are able to experience this, then I would like to think that it's not just a unique feature to me, but is relevant to everyone. However, here I must quickly remark that there are indeed certain types of people who experience frisson and awe more frequently than others. In a paper called Getting Aesthetic Chills from Music, the connection between openness to experience and frisson, published by researchers Mitchell C. Culver and Amani L. Alayi, they say that out of the five big personality traits, extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience, those who have high levels of the latter were much more likely to report episodes of frisson. To me, this makes perfect sense as those who are more open to experience are also more likely to experience awe and more willing to meet head on with the psychological need to accommodate our worldview to new facts and new perspectives, which is crucial for awe. Those without high levels of openness weren't able to experience them as often, but it didn't mean that it was completely impossible for them. And I want to take a quick side note and say that if this all fascinates you and you actually want to experience more frisson and awe in your life, but don't necessarily have high levels of openness to new experiences in your personality, that there is still some hope for you and that can change if you wanted to. Author Olga Kazan says in her 2025 book, Me But Better, that, quote, personality isn't based on what we say we'll do. It's rooted in what we actually do, which becomes what we think about, end quote. She argues that personality change is indeed possible through faking it till you make it, for example, and also long persistence and determination. I say all this briefly just to say that it is possible to feel more awe and frizz in your life, but it just requires persistence and determination. Because one's personality typically doesn't change overnight, although it most assuredly can in certain circumstances, like with psychedelics or Paul on the road to Damascus, for example. So, the question still remains, how can we maximize awe and frisson in our lives, which will help us lead lives with greater clarity on our spiritual quest for self transcendence? Well, Frisson and awe are intimately connected as we talked about earlier. If we increase awe in our lives, spiritual chills will follow. And thankfully, there are quite a few ways in which one can go about doing that. Spending time in nature, attending live concerts, engaging in meaningful passion projects, serving and volunteering in one's community, being in flow states, attending an art gallery, pondering profound philosophy, meditating, or simply deeply connecting with others are all great ways to do this. That is all easier said than done, however. What is absolutely crucial about engaging in any of these tasks is not the action you take, but the way in which you approach these activities. We have to do more than chase after intense experiences, but rather, we have to cultivate a way of being radically open to them when they do arise. It's very Taoist in the sense that we cannot force free zone and awe in our lives, but we must put ourselves in optimal conditions and places which allow ourselves to be fundamentally moved in this way. Phenomenolo- Phenomenologically speaking, they are not simply reactions, but modes of encounter in which we see the world revealing itself with beauty, meaning, and mystery. One can prepare themselves to meet them more often. In order to do this, one must learn how to slow down and notice things in a new light, infusing your moment to moment awareness with mindfulness. Frisson occurs when attention deepens, not when the stimuli intensify. Remember earlier that the two main concepts for awe involve a sense of vastness and a need for accommodation. And there are very pragmatic ways to go about doing this in our lives. This could be as simple as going on a nature walk, but instead of just walking normally, you have to pay hyper attention to the leaves falling from the trees, being curious as to what kind of trees live by you, and pondering their long past. Remembering the fact that there are more trees than humans on the planet, and how they have been here for so much longer than humans can instill awe in the person filled with wonder. Standing amongst prehistoric trees, or atop a mountaintop, or even a skyscraper in the middle of a bustling city can make our egos feel small in the world's vastness, but not insignificant. It's like we are just passing by while having an active participatory role in nature or the world. Putting yourself in wide open spaces with a vast scale can also induce free zone and awe. One of my favorite things to do in the boring state I live in is to go out way into the grasslands with no one around and to just take it all in. To me, the grasslands resemble an ocean of grass as the breeze rolls through its tall stems and makes the grass look like they're waves almost. The sky feels so large and grand to me that I am amazed we are ever able to blast ourselves out and into space. And when I think of this, I also take in the soundscape of the grasslands. I listen to the birds singing and the insects chirping, and I can feel the breeze of the wind sync up with my own breath. All this makes me feel so alive and vibrant when I really slow down to pay attention to everything occurring. Now, I know that I'm just romanticizing touching grass right now, but there's a reason why people say it all the time because it really honestly works. And if one goes about touching grass in a deeper mode of relating and being to the world, it can lay the groundwork for free zone and awe to arise more frequently. Or if none of that appeals to you, you can engage in art, music, poetry, writing in a fundamentally new way. One thing that I have personally done is that I have created a music playlist with all the songs that have deeply moved me and inspired me throughout the years. I only listen to it on special occasions. I have this little personal rule, and whenever I'm needing a mental boost or I'm just in a positive mood and I want to hide in whatever experience I'm in, I then throw it on. When I listen to this playlist, I'm not doing anything else, but I'm simply allowing myself to get fully sucked into the music. And as I listen to all the complicated rhythms and harmonies, I get filled with amazement and wonder as to how humans were possibly able to compose such a beautiful and moving work. Living in the digital age, however, I often forget that music isn't just a thing to be thrown on in the background, but something to fully experience. I wish it was still normal in our day to just lay down on the floor with a vinyl disc playing an album like in the 60s, and you would just listen to it fully all the way through with no interruptions, or even better, no ad breaks. People used to listen to music intentionally, and it is that way of being and relating to the world that we often forget in our endlessly distracting digital lives. We have fundamentally lost our sense of intentionality in the digital age, and this is what I'm trying to help inspire in you and help you realize. But anyways, with regards to music, one can also create their own little daily ritual. where you pick one song that has moved you in the past and you treat it as sacred. You can only listen to it once per day and almost treat the music like you would a cup of fine wine. Drinking too much spoils the taste, and too little makes you forget about it completely. For me personally, this song has been Lateralis by Tool because I find it to be such a spiritual song about evolution and growth, and it always inspires me to keep evolving spiritually. It's almost become like a daily prayer for me, for whenever I listen to it in the shower. It's kind of replaced prayer in that regard for me. Treating music in this way and doing these actions are in line with David Huron's contrast valence theory, like I talked about earlier. If you routinely put yourself in situations you're likely to feel a titanic surge of emotions, you're much more likely to have powerful catharsis or spiritual moments due to the stark contrast of your embodied emotional experience. Another thing one can do to try and instill awe and frisson in one's life is to go against the grain of your current activities and routines and expectations of life. Do you normally listen to a podcast on the way to work? Why don't you try driving in silence for once and be amazed by the peace you may feel? Do you never listen to a podcast on the way to work? Try it out, do so, and try and learn something new about the world and yourself. If you possess a curious attitude towards life, you are bound to be filled with awe as you gain greater understanding of the world and yourself. Changing our routines and normal ways of doing things in this regard can give us a greater likelihood for achieving novel experiences that are likely to precipitate awe and frisson. Can you never see the stars in your city due to light pollution? Embark upon a mini adventure when it's a new moon and drive to the nearest dark sky zone nearby you and watch as the stars slowly shine brighter and pop up more frequently as you leave behind civilization. Now, I'll eventually do a podcast on the concept of mini adventures, so you'll have to wait to be patient for that. But in the meantime, I want you to wonder, do you always drive the same route to work? Try taking an alternative route and make it as scenic as you possibly can. Say you want to engage in art or poetry in a new way. In our digital age, it is not hard to find beautiful works that inspire us. But the key is to being moved by it is by not seeing as much as you can, but you need to limit yourself and slow it down. Quality is greater than quantity. So as you scroll through social media and you see something that moves you, fully take it in and then immediately stop scrolling. Take a break from your phone and just sit and ponder about how that inspiring post or artwork inspired and moved you. The takeaway here is to bring intentionality back to our lives, back to our phone habits, which will in the end give us a greater sense of agency and purpose. Now, I could go on and list more examples, but I'm curious and I want to hear from you in the comments if you have any other pragmatic examples of how one can induce awe and wonder more in your life. Now, in conclusion, to sum this episode up, I want you to remember back to the first episode of the podcast and think back to how the words spirit and inspire share the same root. I want you to always keep this in mind as you journey forward towards experience more awe and free zone in your life. Anything that inspires you will fill your spirits and induce awe in you. And you will be immediately be able to tell if something inspires you if you feel frisson, waves of chills reverberating in your entire body. Goosebumps, in my eyes, are the biological marker and sign that your spirit is alive and vibrant within you. This will be the sign of daimonic or spiritual influences at work, undeniable proof that you are living your truth. Awe itself, at its core, is a fundamentally spiritual and transcendent experience, and seeking after it can be a wonderful secular alternative as your journey of spirituality unravels itself detached from any institutional religion. Seeking a life of awe can be a profound philosophical way of life and being in the world, which can have profound ethical transformations in your life. Because awe, at its core, humbles you in the light of our immanent and transcendent reality. If you follow what you are passionate about, what you think will inspire you, and you allow yourself to be moved through frisson, then you're not just living a life filled with deep awe and spiritual connection. Your life itself then becomes a masterwork of art. In section 290 of The Gay Science by Friedrich Nietzsche, Nietzsche triumphantly asserts that, quote, one must give value to their existence by behaving as if one's very existence were a work of art. He also writes elsewhere that art itself is the proper task of life. End quote. If we keep this attitude in mind, then we possess the ultimate antidote towards meaninglessness and nihilism. that pervades our culture today. It doesn't matter if we never pick up a paintbrush or instruments and never make a piece of tangible art in our lives. If we live our lives artistically, carefully crafting our embodied experience so that we suck all the marrow out of life, like Thoreau often preached on, then we are bound to lead lives filled with awe and wonder, which is guided by the spiritual shivers we get along the way. And this will all undoubtedly bring meaning and purpose back to our lives in our spiritually disenchanted world. Doing this, however, involves more than just seeking novel experiences. It fundamentally requires a novel way of experiencing life. Maximizing and optimizing frisson and awe in our lives requires a new way of being and relating to reality. This is something that's achievable by anyone who learns to deepen their attention and are able to infuse that intention with intentionality and spiritual connectedness within the wondrous world in which we have the opportunity to experience to its fullest potential. Well, that is it for this episode of the podcast today. I hope you found it enlightening and hopefully inspiring or at least interesting. So, what do you think about the phenomenology of frisson or goosebumps? In what ways have you experienced it before? And did those moments leave you feeling more spiritually connected? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And I just want to deeply thank you for listening today. And I hope to join you next time as we dive fully into the topic of panpsychism. In the meantime, I wish you all peace, joy, and wisdom. Peace. Have a good one.